All right, we'll go ahead and get started. It's a little bit after 8. I'm sure more people will join. I think we had about 15 or 18 on the schedule. So good morning. Thank you all for attending the corn data webinar. So this is a series of webinars that we started this year after every major crop release. So we did one for wheat back in August. This will be the one for corn, and then hopefully we'll do one for soybeans probably in mid or late December. The purpose of this is to kind of go through the OVT data for this crop from the last year, highlight some varieties or hybrids that did well based off of regions, and talk about kind of how the data is sorted out from this past year. So just to get started, if you have questions, I have my chat open on the side. If you have questions, just throw them in the chat. Doesn't matter during the presentations. It's kind of an informal thing. I'll happy to answer them as we go through. This won't be a variety selection tool training, but we're going to use the variety selection tool to talk about a lot of the data that we're looking at from the OVT from this last year. And as part of that, if you have any specific things you'd want me to look for on the data, I'm happy to go through those towards the end of the webinar. When I start, I'm just going to be focusing mainly on the top 10, top 15 based off of multiple years, single years, and then we might go through some regional looks as well if we have time. But during that, if you have some time that you want to, or you have some questions about finding some different varieties, we can absolutely look at that. So definitely put questions in chat if you have them. I'll keep up track on that as we go. So let's start real quick with where can we find the OVT data. So right now, the OVT data is a lot of different formats, designed in such a way that it's accessible to anybody in any different way that they see fit. So right now, you should be seeing the OVT website. If you go to the OVT website, which is just ncovt.com, you can see all of our crops listed here on the left-hand side. You can click on corn. It has all of our years listed, 2023 being the most recent. And this is where you're going to find the majority of the starting of our data. So I would come here first. Here you're going to find both the link to the variety selection tool if we want to go a little bit more in depth, which we will here in a minute. But you'll also find some reports both out of the variety selection tool and independent of the variety selection tool. So these reports are kind of a table format to give you an idea of how the data is shaped up from this last year. So really quick look so that you can see what did well, what didn't well based off of different situations. So for instance, these multiple years are out of the variety selection tool. So if I click on this one, it's just a PDF. Hopefully that's still sharing. Maybe, yes. So you can see a PDF of all of the maturities in corn. So we go from a 109 all the way out to 120. And we're just looking at anything that the variety selection tool is deemed above average. So one standard deviation or more above the average of the mean. And you can see the list of hybrids here on the left, the years they've been in the test because it's a multiple year look with their yields, with their test weights. We've talked about this before, but top yield group percentage means the percentage of the time it was in that top LSD. So if you think about, if you looked at the old tables, if they're bolded or they're in green, they're in that top LSD, which means they weren't significantly different from the highest yielding hybrid. And so this is just saying what percentage of the time across all the locations we tested in these different years was it in the top yield group. And this is kind of a measure of consistency, right? We think about this as if I've got a higher percentage, I feel more confident about this variety going on any soil environment, any kind of management situation. So we have that listed, and then all the hybrids listed here as well. This is straight out of the variety selection tool, but these are reports that we put on the OVT website for y'all to consume. The other things we have are, and this is kind of new this year, we have what's called a location summary for our single year data. And this is just a very quick and dirty look at the entire year from 2023. So we have everything in statewide here on the left. And then we've got all the data out here by each location moving out to the right with that top LSD or that top yield group we were talking about highlighted in green, right? And so the nice thing about this, and this is just medium, we have one for late as well, is that you can look how these hybrids are sorted statewide, and then you can look across the different locations to see where they were in the top yield group based off that county. And that gives you an idea, like if I'm in Pamlico County, I can say, okay, this Dynagro 54 BC 34 did well overall statewide. Was it in the top yield group of Pamlico? It was. So I feel pretty good about that. I feel pretty good about its consistency because look at the number of times that it's in that top yield group across all of our locations. Again, just another way for you to consume the data, for you to look at the data, another accessible way for you to get to that OVT data and identify what did well for you. So we have these are called location summary tables, and they're always included with any of our data, whether that's wheat, corn, or soybeans. They'll say location summary. We have the same type of reports that we were looking at in the multi-year data. These are reports out of the variety selection tool. One thing I've done this year is I've actually made the tables themselves available to you in Excel, where it says medium corn data tables or late corn data tables. You can click on this link and it will download. I'll go ahead and do it. It'll download the Excel version. So now you have access to the actual Excel versions of those tables if you want to go into that data and you want to do some of your own sorting. Again, just in a way of making this as accessible to you as possible. For me, this is a good starting point if I'm looking at hybrid selections. I can look at these tables, I can make some kind of quick and dirty selections if I need to. But again, that variety selection tool for me is your better bet for finding that specific hybrid that fits your situation, whether that's your environment or maybe your management style or the type of hybrids that you can look for, because you can do a lot more searching in that variety selection tool than you can necessarily by doing these, looking at these static data tables. So that's where the OVT data is. This is how we're set up. All of our data, if you go to ncovt.com, it's situated there, whether that's the link to the variety selection tool itself, or all of the data in tabular format, in Excel format, in location summary format. Like you have a lot of different options, whatever fits your style of looking at this data, we're giving that to you, we're providing that to you. So now that we've talked about where we can find the data, let's start digging into the data a little bit. I'm going to see if I can't mess my sharing situation up. I want to talk about this past year's data just kind of overall. Okay, so I'm showing you, hopefully you're seeing a map of North Carolina up right now. The X's you're seeing up here are all of our locations that we tested at in 2023. So we added a location up here in Person County in 2023. This is a brand new location because it fits this little gap that we had. Those of you in this area, we really hadn't had an opportunity to serve you. We started that this year. We got a wheat location up here, we had a bean location up here, and we have a corn location up here. So you can get a lot more data coming out of this kind of northeastern Piedmont situation. But then we had locations out here in the western Piedmont, one in Surry County, one in Rowan County, one in Union, and these are all represented in our Piedmont region. So if when I start talking about Piedmont regions, this is where that data is coming from. We had 3 locations in the coastal plain, one in Bertie County, one in Sampson, one in Robinson. And then we have 3 locations in what I call the Tidewater. You can really call it Blacklands, any kind of, there's a lot of names for this region. I call it the Tidewater, one in Pamlico, one in Beaufort, and one in Pasquotank, one in Beaufort, one in Pamlico. So if we look at the yields from each one of these different regions, you can see we're fairly consistent overall. 210 in the Piedmont, 214 in the Tidewater, 180 in the coastal plain. We actually had a very good yields across locations this year. If we dig down into the single counties themselves, you'll notice this NR here. So we did lose 3 tests out of all the tests that we executed this year. We lost this late test in Person. This is in a lower lying area. Water came up after planting, so we lost that test because those hybrids got drowned out. In Surry County, we had some excessive rainfall after planting, and we actually saw denitrification. So very, very poor yields just because that soil didn't hold on to that nitrogen. And then we lost the medium test in Rowan. We had some very dry weather after planting. The ground was a little tough, so we weren't able to get really good emergence on that site, which led to a little bit more variable data than we were comfortable releasing. So those are the 3 tests that didn't get released this year. But overall, we've got good yields across the board. I do want to point out something to you, and this is a reason why we're going to start talking about using percent trial mean instead of raw yield. So let's say you're a grower. Let's say you're a grower specifically around Bertie County and you're wanting to make a hybrid selection, right? We actually did very well on the sandy soil in Bertie. We're 152 on the medium test and 156 on the late tests. But if you're going to make a selection based off of raw yield, your data is going to be skewed toward, if you're looking at statewide specifically, your data is going to be skewed towards the Piedmont and towards the Tidewater because you got higher raw yields in those regions. So that variety selection or that hybrid selection is going to kind of pull towards what it would be in the Piedmont or Tidewater. Even if you look just in the coastal plain region, right? So again, you're in the Bertie, you're in this northern coastal plain area. You're looking at this 152, 156 average yields. Sampson County, you're a little bit closer to that 180. Robinson County, you're a little bit closer to that 190, maybe low 200s. So if you're making a selection, and I'm in Bertie County, that selection just based off that regional look is going to get pulled towards the south. It's going to get pulled into what it looked like in Sampson or Robinson. Not to a great degree, but enough that it's going to skew those results a little bit for you. So this is why we talk about percent trial mean. And that's why I'm going to start looking at selections based off percent trial mean. What percent trial mean is comparing the hybrid to the mean of the entire test. So it's saying, how did this hybrid perform against just a random selection out of the entire test? And then you look at that as a percentage, whether it was 10% better than the mean or 10% lower than the mean. But what it does is it standardizes those raw yield levels. So instead of having, a lower level here in Bertie County compared to a little bit higher maybe in the Piedmont, everything's now standardized to the mean of the test that it was in. And so you start looking at percentage, you're actually start looking at more relative values for those hybrids, not only within that location, but across locations and for statewide data in particular. That's not to say that raw yield is not worth looking at. It absolutely is. But I want you to keep that in mind when you start looking at data in terms of raw yield, is that if I'm in a situation, and it's the opposite's true as well, right? If I'm in Pamlico County, raw yield is going to be king for me, but a lot of these little lower yields are going to be pulled towards those lower yielding areas. So it's going to skew a little bit. Whereas if I'm looking at percent trial mean, it's pretty well standardized across locations. Hopefully that makes sense. But this is why we're going to start talking about percent trial mean when we start looking in the variety selecting tool itself. Overall, very good yields across all locations. I'm very happy. We were actually able to do some stink bug sprays with a drone that we've not done before. I think that definitely helped us, particularly in that Sampson County area, keep our yields up there. Despite the dry weather, though, I felt pretty good about our yields overall across the locations. Does anybody have any questions on the first two things we've talked about, whether that's where to find the data or just kind of a general overview of the data itself? Okay. So we'll move on. Let's start talking about the specific data. Let me see if I can find the right SharePoint. There we go. So we're going to go into the variety selection tool. Again, this is not a variety selection tool training. There may be elements in here that you're not familiar with, and that's okay. Find me, email me, call me, text me. I'm happy to run through some of this with you. I'll probably do a little bit running through it while we're looking at the data specifically. But this, again, is your best bet of searching for criteria that are important to you for these hybrids that you're making these selections for. So this is the dashboard. This is where we land. We're going to go into corn, and I'm going to look at the OVT data, which is just kind of the overall data for what we're looking at. We have the option here for you to look specifically by maturities. What we call a medium is anything from a 110 to a 115, a late being a 115 and later, and then earlier being 110 and earlier. Now, I will say this past year, we only had 3 early entries. So those 3 early entries got folded into medium. So if you did a search on early this year, you're not going to see, nothing's going to come up because it got folded into the medium test. I'm not going to take advantage of these presets. I'm going to look custom. So I'm going to do my own little searching, but I just want to draw your attention to the fact that these exist. Definitely streamline that searching for you if you're wanting to look at a specific maturity group. This is a lot more important when it comes to soybeans because we can split out by maturity group in soybeans very quickly. So if you're interested in 3, 4, or 5, you can. In corn, it's a little bit, this is a little bit static in that you have to know that for me, medium is 110 to 115. And I'll show you here in a minute, you can actually you can search or filter by specific relative maturities yourself if you want to. But I'm going to do custom. And then I'm looking. When it says means over here, it's asking for the data that you want to look at. I talked about why we're not going to look at raw yield here, previously when we're talking about the full data set. We're going to look at percent trial mean because I think that's a more standard way of looking at this data. And I'm not filtering for anything yet. We're just going to look at percent trial mean across the entire set. And I'm going to move this out of my way. And I'm going to make this screen bigger. There we go. So this is all the data. This is all the data, as you can see up here from 2023. We have everything single year across from left to right all the way out to 2023 averages. And then we have those split out by regions with the single locations off to your left. And then we have the multiple year data off here to the right. So 21 to 23, again, split out by regions. And again, with the entire or statewide for multiple year. So all your data in one place. Yes, screen real estate is important in this situation. You can click on this little icon here, which allows you to get rid of that sidebar. I'm using a widescreen monitor, so it's making it a little bit easier for me. If you have to, there's a way that you can scroll at the bottom if it's a little bit more tight for you, and you can scroll back and forth and look at that data. So we're looking at percent trial mean. I want to look at multiple year data first, but I only want to look at varieties that have been in this test for 2 or more years. So I'm just going to filter that to number of years greater than 1. So we can just focus on those multiple year hybrids. Now, you're going to say, well, Ryan, what's going on with all this blank space? I don't understand. Well, you remember we lost some tests in the Piedmont, particularly in the late test this year. And we also lost some at the medium test in Rowan. That's why you're seeing blanks there. Washington, Duplin, and Green were locations we've tested at in the last 3 years. We just didn't have data at those locations this year. That's why you're seeing blanks there. But we're just going to focus over here. So you see where it says total, it's got an arrow going down. That's mean it's sorted from highest to lowest. And you can see we're sorted. I've not separated this out by maturity. So for multiple year data, because you really get into a limited number of hybrids you're looking at, I'm keep putting all maturities in here. So this is anything from a 109 all the way out to a 120. And then we're seeing that the database itself is saying that anything in blue is above average, with this teal being the highest. Anything in yellow is below average, with this red being the lowest. And again, we're looking at percent trial mean. So the way you want to think about this, for me at least, is 3 or 5% or higher is something I want to look at if I'm looking at percent trial mean, particularly in multiple years. So 3% or higher is what I want to see. And you can see for the most part, on average, we're 3.2% or higher. There's a couple that are below 3%, but overall, we've got a good selection set here. I'm just, for the sake of time, I'm just going to look at the top 10. There's obviously more here than just the top 10. There's more that you can pull out here, but just for the sake of time, I'm just going to pull out the top 10. You do that by just clicking on these variety names, and it tells you how many you selected up here. That's 5, 9, and 10. And then we're going to compare these by clicking on this compare icon. Now, I did this for wheat, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to pull it into a compare window, and then I'm going to put this compare window link into chat. And so later on, I'm probably going to ramble through half of this, and you may remember 0.25% of it. But later on, you'll have that link, and you can be like, all right, these are the top 10 that Ryan pulled out of multiple year. Let me go back and look at them and spend some time looking at it. So I'm going to go ahead and link this into chat. You're welcome to follow along. You're welcome to just record that link and use it later, however you want to do it. But what I've done is I pulled those top 10s in here, and now we can look at all the summary data for those top 10 multiple year varieties. Now, obviously, it's showing me all the number of years that was tested here at the top, the number of actual variety records that we have, and then it's overall yield. So I do have raw yield pulled in here with its percent trial mean. And then any other statistics, any other data that we collected. Here's the top yield group percentage. So that's that same percentage I was showing you in that table before, along with test weight. And we do have ear height, stalk height that we take. So if you're interested in the stature of the hybrid itself, you'll have that data in here that you can look at. You'll notice I have early medium on this Revere 0918. This was in the early tests last year because we only had 3 entries in the early test this year. It got pulled into the medium, and that's why you're seeing it say early medium, because that's just the test that was in. But you do have your relative maturity. So 117 day, 119 day, that should be 111 or 112. I think there's a typo in there. All of your relative maturities are here, so you can go back in and make sure that that's the maturity that you're looking at. Again, because we're looking across multiple years. Dad says you have to love 6744. It has been performing a while, been around a while, yet still performing well. It has. You'll see that it got pulled into this top yield group here. I'm sorry, into this top 10 here. 7.2% of the trial mean. That's way above where my target's at. Doing really well for a late hybrid. I will say, if you look at, and we can just compare the last 2 years, the 6835, which is fairly new. I think it came out last year, brand new. it's been fairly dominant in our testing. So 13.5%. If you went back and looked at, I'm hoping that you're seeing my screen as it exists. You are. If you go back and look at this sorted, you can tell that it's at the top here as far as percent trial mean, with that DK, with that 6744 behind it, and then the Dynagrow 54 VC 34 being just behind it. You know, for all intents and purposes, these are fairly consistent or close to each other. If you're looking at these top 10, this 6835 is just showing out very strongly in our data. And it's been very dominant in the coastal plain region. We'll talk about that here in a second. But overall, this past year is fairly consistent. What's some other ones we will look at? So we have decab, which we talked about, 69.99 showing at the top 10. This is a C Consultants at 11:12 a.m. It's done well in the Piedmont. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We talked about the Dynagrow 54 VC 34. This FS 6306, this is a grow mark. So you find this in what used to be Southern States, but they're selling their FS brand in the North Carolina right now. Revere is Revere Seed, which used to be known as Local Seed. It's now Revere Seed. This is one of their early maturity hybrids that have done really well. We talked about this decab. This is Access Line 63M73. They're out of Maryland. Dynagrow 53 TC23, and then Revere, which this also used to be a Local Seed 1307 TC. A couple years ago, we saw this one do fairly well. It's still remained fairly consistent, but I think it's been overtaken by a couple other hybrids. So that's your overall statewide look if we're looking at the top 10. Now what we can do, because we have the ability to search this, is now we can filter this by regions. So I can go back and say, okay, yes, that's all statewide. Is there anything that fits specifically in the Piedmont versus what fits statewide? And so I can just sort by Piedmont by clicking on it twice, and now you got that arrow going down. There's a different set. Well, there's similarities here. You can see the ones that I selected from statewide are showing up here, but you got some that pulled up that weren't in that top 10 statewide from before. They're the ones that weren't check marked here, right? So the 6720, you're like, what's 6720? It's an Integra line. I'm not really sure, and this is something that we're going to be working on moving forward. I'm not really sure where you'd go get Integra seed from, but this is something we're going to talk to the sponsors about, maybe integrating into the variety selection tool. Is like, okay, Integra 6720 I'm interested in. Now I have a link to either a retailer or to a seed salesman that would allow me to get access to that seed, right? Because that's the gap we have right now. Is that I can tell you that here's Integra, here's a picture of it, you know, here's how well it did, because it was, if we looked at the Piedmont region, it's behind 6835, but it's still doing really, really well. You know, where do I go to find that hybrid? So that's something we're working on. You still see some similarities. That 6744, the C Consultants, the Dynagrow, another decab line, 6599 is showing out fairly well in the Piedmont. And here's a good example of why it's important to look at this more specifically. Here's a 6599. If you were looking at statewide, you would have never captured it, particularly if you're in the Piedmont. But it's a good Piedmont option for you. It may not do as well in the Tidewater or Coastal Plain, but it's an excellent Piedmont option for you for the last 2 years. So this is an important reason why we want to kind of search and look at different environments so we can find these hybrids that might not have shown up on the statewide, but absolutely have a fit specific to your region. Again, Access, Decab, Revere. The Revere's Pioneer 1197 is showing up really nicely in the Piedmont over the last 3 years. Seedway, Dynagrow, and I think these were both Integra lines as well. So you see some different looks based off the Piedmont. Now I'm going to keep these statewides check marked, and we're going to go in the Coastal Plain real quick. Now you're starting to see we're getting a little bit more alignment with what we had statewide, but you're seeing Augusta 1465s showing up, did well in the Coastal Plain over the last 2 years. Seeing that Seedway 1600 VT showing up, again, did well in the Coastal Plain. And then we go to the Tidewater and do the exact same thing. See these Integra lines come up. There's a grow mark line that shows up in this top 10. So the 6017, it's done well in the Piedmont. Where am I at? Sorry. It's done well in the Piedmont. It's actually did fairly well in the Coastal Plain, which I think we saw it towards the bottom there of that top group. Here's the Access line 64M20 doing well. Dynagrow, Decab, Dynagrow, another Grow Mark line, Seedway, and then you see a Seed Consultants 1183. I think it's a newer one that they came out with a couple of years ago. Doing a little bit better. See, in this case, again, doing a little bit better than the 1112 AM, which did well, did better overall. Is this making sense? Hopefully. Dad, did you have anything that you wanted to add to this?
Well, no, this makes good. Can you hear me?
I guess the answer is no, or he doesn't know
Hello?
how to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh,
Did
okay.
anybody have any comments about what they're seeing so far? I see you
Yeah.
unmuted, Rod.
Well, yeah, this makes good sense. I've seen hybrids like I've noted that I know
Anything
are
that
very.
makes sense? Any hybrids that you've seen done well?
Ryan, your dad's trying to talk. Evidently, you can't hear him. You got your speak. I don't know what's going on, but he is making a comment.
My thing was on mute. Dad, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just want to say this makes perfect sense. Hybrids like this DKC 6999, which is a good hybrid, but does really variable in environments. You see it really perform well in some places, and then other places it just at the bottom or really a dog. The other thing about the Pioneer hybrids that I think is very interesting is you see it in the Piedmont. They do really well. I think they don't tolerate heat as well in the coastal plain, and Tidewater I think is where they have their problem. But they do really well where they clearly have a little cooler nighttime environment. So yeah, this does make sense to me. The one that surprises me is this 54 VC34. I don't know that I've heard them talk a lot about that hybrid, but clearly has performed very well across the state here in the last 3 years. So
No, I think that's the cool thing about looking at the data this way is we find those hidden gems based off a region or based off environment that we may not capture with an overall data set. You know, I've got the top 10 highlighted or check marked over here on the left-hand side, but you can see by just looking at the Tidewater region, I'm capturing 1, 2, 3, 4 that I wouldn't have seen if I looked at that statewide, maybe a little bit more. That's why this variety selection tool is so important to be able to give you those options. So we led with multiple year. The reason I led with multiple year is because multiple years are better predictor of how hybrids are going to perform. I feel better about recommending a hybrid based off of our data if I've seen it perform well over multiple years, because then we get multiple environments, we get multiple weather patterns, and we can see how it responds in those situations. Dad mentioned this at the Chrome Field Day. You know, we're really looking at temporal data here. We're looking at how varieties have performed temporally. Hundreds of varieties perform temporally over tens of locations. And that gives you kind of some high confidence in being able to say, okay, I can put 6835 on a good portion of my acreage because I feel like it's going to perform based off of how it's performed over multiple years in the OVT. So that's why I've led with multiple year data, but we're going to change tracks a little bit, and I'm going to dig down into single year data real quick, because one thing we want to do is be able to capture not only the ones that have done well over multiple years, but the brand new ones. Because there's going to be hybrid turnover. You see it a lot in soybeans, a little bit less so in corn, a little bit less so even than that in wheat. But there is turnover. And so you're going to start looking at the newer hybrids that are coming out to make sure you're ready for potentially incorporating those on a decent portion of your acres. Now, I'm going to talk about single year data with the following caveat. I would never recommend anything that we've only seen for 1 year to be planted on a large portion of your acreage. I would only recommend that you try it on a portion, maybe a field, to see how it does. Because if we've only had 1 year of data on it, we don't feel very confident about how it's going to perform year over year, particularly across environments. I will say this, I'm be looking at single year data here. There are going to be hybrids from the multiple year data set that are already in here. You're going to see the first one right off the bat, DKC 6835. We're just looking at this 2023 averages now, but it's still fairly dominant statewide, teal being the highest level, and then down from there. Again, my target with percent trial mean is 3% or higher. So you're seeing a lot of good options there. In statewide for the single year. Sorry. So let's click on these real quick and we'll take these to compare. And I'm going to do this for each of the regions. so that you have a link to that. I didn't do it for multiple years because I just wanted to highlight how those differences existed. It's hard to do that when we're pulling everything to compare every single time. I want to highlight how that worked there, but I'm happy to provide those to you all if you want them. So we'll do top 10. Again, there's more here that you can search for. I'm just focusing on top 10 for brevity of time. We'll take that to compare. Now I'm looking at statewide. I'm seeing that 6744 again, the 6999, that's 54 VC34, 6835, of course. Integra is coming back, 63, the Axis 63 M73, Dynagrow 58 TC 94. This is a BTP Agritech line. This is out of Georgia. There's another Integra line and then another decab line that we're seeing. But overall, pretty good options across the board. Again, your mellow maturity is down here if you want to separate this out. We can do that. Actually, I do that real quick before we get done. But for corn, I generally look at everything kind of at once, unless I've got a specific target in mind. And let me give you that link in chat. Okay. Any questions on this? You're going to see, I think, I'll go back to analytics real quick. I don't think we pulled in. So this Integra line is a single year. The 6356 is brand new this year. And this Integra line is brand new this year. And this decab is brand new this year. So we did pull in 4 out of the top 10 that were brand new, that were not included in that multi-year data set. So depending on where we can access this Agritech or this Integra, you know, you've got a good opportunity here, maybe with this 58 TC94 to try something new across multiple acreage. I think the other 2 were in our multiple year. Yes, they were. All right, so let's do the exact same thing that we did with the multi-year. Let's look at Piedmont. Now we've obviously pulled some different ones in. 11:12 a.m., at least in our data set, has had kind of a preference for the Piedmont. You see it does well. Overall, it does well Coastal Plain Piedmont, but particularly this year, it has kind of a Piedmont lean. This was the hybrid a couple of years ago that in our Surrey County location was the first one I've ever hit 300 bushels with. So it's not surprising to me that it comes back up into this Piedmont region. You see a Growmark FS come in. We've seen this one already. I'm trying to see. So this 56 TC44 did really well in the Piedmont this last year for us. It's brand new. You see that Pioneer line come back in. This Augusta 1365 did really well in the Piedmont for us this last year. It's brand new this last year. Progeny, same thing. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. This Integra line did well. Progeny, again, Pioneer. And then I think this is a tree. I think there's another Integra. No, it's Gateway. Sorry. These are both Gateway. Where it says tree and the number is Gateway. It's Gateway Seeds out of Illinois. So you see some newer ones that are coming in based off this Piedmont look that we haven't seen before, that did not necessarily show up in our statewide look for this. So that's Piedmont. Let's go to Coastal Plain real quick. Same deal. Now we're pulling in some additional. So the 6422 really did well in the Piedmont, or in the Coastal Plain. And when I say did well, like we're still above average in the Piedmont, we're still above average in the Tidewater. But if we're thinking about that 3% as our cutoff, it did fairly well in that Coastal Plain region. See that Progeny line. This is a new decab line, 1383. Revere 1307 showing back up, and it has had a little bit of a Coastal Plain region lean for us. This should be, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is Access. Access 66Z71. NK has a line, the 1748, 3110. Can't speak this morning. Again, good results in the Coastal Plain. Access, Growmark, and then Revere as well. And then if we look at Tidewater, Tidewater, we actually align fairly well with what the statewide looks like, but you do have access to grow marks. This is more corn 4161. It's showing up well in that Tidewater region. Pioneer 6222 did really well in the Piedmont region. Tidewater region. It did have a good showing in the Piedmont region. It was just a little weaker for us in our data in the Coastal Plain region. Matt, any comments on the single year data?
I don't think he's on anymore. I haven't seen him anyway.
Perfect.
Hey,
Rod,
Ryan,
any
I have a
comment?
question.
This is recorded. You better be careful what you say about perfect.
Ryan, I had a question
Yes.
on one of the, I guess, new decab. It appeared it was the only non-BT hybrid that I have seen so far show up.
The 6356?
Yes.
Yes.
There's a push to definitely include refuge acreage and whatnot. Are we seeing as many non-BTs being tested or entered into the OVT to give growers some good information to choose from?
So the non-BTs that you're seeing in this test are part of a project with Dominic that we've integrated into this test. So these hybrids were tested along with all the other OVT entries, but were part of Dominic's test at looking at BT versus non-BT. Same test he's doing with the agents, if that makes sense. It's just an OVT look across multiple regions instead of a county by county look with the agents. So what I'll say is that we've tried to get non-BT entries into the OVT, like we've requested that, and to a point of fact, trying to have our separate non-BT test. We just haven't gained much traction. My hope with working with Dominic in this is that we're showing now that there are non-BT hybrids that do well. The 6356 is one of those. And through that, hopefully encourage some more entries from companies to put some non-BT options in for growers to look at. Because we know they exist. We know there's more than just this one decab. We have some Pioneer ones in here as well. So if we can get that data in so that growers can search specifically by BT versus non-BT, I think that's going to be valuable for them. Does that answer your question, Mac?
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Ryan, I've got a question, but do you? It's really more about individual hybrids, maybe how they perform. I mean, do you need to go over some more things here and then take that question, or do you want to just?
No, go ahead.
Well, so the 6835, you talked about, how well it showed up. Did you see any stalk issues with that hybrid in any of your sites or at any of your sites?
When you say stalk issues, do you mean just like
weak stalks? Maybe if you had some sites that got harvested after the storm, did they blow over a little bit?
Not really. I'm pulling in the trial data just to confirm that I don't have lodging data. I don't. No, I didn't really see any kind of stalk issues with these. And honestly, if I'd seen stalk issues, they would have definitely shown up in the overall yield data.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we've had lodging issues or anything like that, it would have come through the combine 100%. Right. So I haven't seen anything that's jumped out at me about that. That's not to say there's not, but for me, I have not seen any of those issues in our testing.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Ron.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask a question, and just to get your feedback and thoughts on this, because in the water resiliency trials, we've been looking at some of these same hybrids and some older genetics, and I see in your data, for example, Pioneer 1197, still running strong. We're seeing the same thing in the water resiliency trials, and Donna Grove 58 VC65 was in our trials. It's still up there at the top, and it's old technology, old genetics. How long do you see this going on with the new technologies that's coming out?
I mean, it's hard to say because you get hybrids like 6744 that, it has a place, it performs well. It's been out for how long have we been testing this hybrid for now? Mm-hmm. I mean, probably since I've been here. Yeah, since 2017. So, it's where you have these high flyers like a 6744, it's really tough to get them out of the market because growers have adopted them. Grower adoption is really hard. Think about you choosing an iPhone versus a Samsung or whatever, your Google phone. The minute that you've chosen that ecosystem, it's really hard to move you off that ecosystem. If you've chosen a 6744, no matter if there's like the newest of the new technologies out there, you feel confident about what your yields are coming off those fields with the 6744. And that's really what drives this adoption turnover cycle, is that, yeah, there's newer technologies, there's Stracepta, there's other trait technologies that are out there that are probably better. But until you can show that grower that, hey, this 6744 old chassis is not doing XYZ for you, it's hard to get those off. As a result, you see some of these sticking around. The Dyna-Gro line you're talking about, the decab line we're showing, you see them sticking around probably at least a couple years longer than what the company assumed that their life cycle would be. But that doesn't mean it keeps those newer stuff from coming in. It just makes that cycle slower. So I think it's a case-by-case basis. You know, if you got hybrids that are performing really well, you're going to see them hang on forever. Think about Shirley wheat. We have been testing Shirley wheat since 2012, over a decade. And the reason that it's still there, and that's a kind of a different conversation because you're not talking about traits, but the reason it's still there is because it still yields, it still performs, it still has that subset of people that want to use it. So you're going to see that on higher performing hybrids, not so much on kind of medium to lower performing hybrids, but higher performing hybrids, they'll stick around. Eventually they'll get replaced by newer stuff. It's just going to take longer on that life cycle.
Okay, I just make a comment too, and just an observation. Since Chad just spoke, and it made me think about the value of what you're doing here, Ryan, with these tests, and then what Chad is doing, has started doing in the last couple of years with the site there in Plymouth. It would be neat maybe next year, if there are some similar hybrids, you know, when you're going through this, it might be interesting to see some of his work as well, along with that, you know, it might complement it some way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've had, so Chad and I have had these conversations already this year.
Good. Cool. Yeah. I figured you had, but I was just going to make the observation, but I can see how that would be valuable as well, just to look at something like you said, it's a real racehorse. Oh, how did it perform though in 3 different environments, like Chad is able to manipulate with that system he's got there. So yeah, I think that'll be really complementary to this.
And that's my vision for this database, right? Like the more data that we can include in this, the more linked data that we can include in this, the more the grower has an option to find those specific fits for them, right?
Right.
Like right now, I can look at a 6835, I can tell you yield. We do include, where is it? Days above 95 as kind of a really rough, how dry was it, and total season rainfall. If we can incorporate Chad's data, whether it's at this level or at even this graphical level, to say, okay, I want to filter by, you know, results on high water stress or low water stress, or, you know, we have those characteristics baked into the data itself. And now we're giving those growers options to search for that criteria as well. Yeah, there's tremendous power there. 6835 has done well in the OVT across different regions. That's great. How does it do well when I've got so much water? Because year every year, I fight with water. How does it do on years where it's just droughty all the time? Because year over year, I face drought situations. Like if we can link that data in here, I think there's a lot of power then back to the grower to make those selections.
Yeah.
That goes back to the Dominic BT test. You know, we've integrated that non-BT test into here because I think it's important for growers to look and see what yield options they have in non-BT hybrids. And my hope is that companies see that, oh, look, you know, we can sell a non-BT hybrid based off this data. Let's pull more non-BT hybrids into this test so we can give growers an opportunity to look at our material.
Well, Ryan, I agree with that. I think that's a major issue. Just talking with growers this past year on seed selection. Yeah, there's non-BT out there, but actually knowing how they're going to perform in relation to these BT hybrids, that data is not always present, or maybe the seed's not available that they're looking for. So I think, I've tried to incorporate a couple in our trials this year, but I do think maybe we need a little bit more of that data coming out.
Well, I think that with 6356 essentially being in the top yield group for the coastal plain, actually near the top yield group statewide for medium, I think that's going to start that conversation. Because people are going to see that they're going to, what is this number? We haven't seen it before, and that'll start getting us into a way to non-BT actually can perform as well as BT hybrids in our testing. Any other questions on what we looked at so far? I do want to leave a little bit of time. We got about 13 minutes. Does anybody have any specific things they want to look at, whether that's certain relative maturity range, certain responses on soil information, because we have soil CEC, we have percent organic matter, we have pH included in this data. I can run through some of those specific scenarios if somebody has something they want to look at.
Hey, Ryan, this is Billy in Bertie. Not exactly what you're looking at, but is there data out there that talks about the flex that the varieties have, what different flex characteristics they offer?
There is. I don't have it in our data. We don't capture that currently. Your best bet for that, and this is not sponsored by NC State, so let me put that out ahead of time, is that I have the company tech sheet linked here. And so you can get to that company data, and some of them do talk about flex, some of them don't. It's really dependent on the company, but that if you're looking for that information, it's probably best through the company tech sheet at this point. I'm not ruling out that we'll eventually collect it, but right now we're not currently collecting it, so we don't have it into the data set.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Any other questions? When I talk about, let me go back a little bit. When I talk about, when I talk about querying for like a specific data set, like we have the opportunities here where I can say, I want my soil class to be anything that's a sandy loam or a loamy sand. And I want to know what performed well. And we're kind of getting at this when we talk about regions, but I've got it down to specific soil class because not all regions are all clay or all organic or whatever. We've got sandy locations in the Piedmont, we've got sandy locations in the Tidewater. So we want to look at a global look at like soil class. We can do that by querying this data and then querying the yield here, just like we were visualizing it before. Here we're just asking the database a question. So I want anything over 3%. I probably should increase that. And my query is not going to work. This is why you always test things out before you get in front of a group of people. All right. So anyway, that version of the database is broken, but you have the opportunity to query your data into a more specific format than I've been describing so far. Don't worry, I'll be talking to the developer immediately after this to get that part fixed and working so that you're able to do that immediately after watching this video, hopefully on YouTube. But you have that opportunity. Right now I'm looking at just by regions. I'm using regions as kind of a poor man's, this is a soil type, Piedmont mostly clay, coastal plain mostly sand, Tidewater mostly silt loam organic. Those are very gross generalizations. You can do a better job at searching if you go into that criteria, that query data set, and search for specific soil classes. So that's the only reason I wanted to mention that is because of that.
Hey Ryan, this is Della. Have you posted the silage data yet for this year?
I have not. Thank you for mentioning that. So I have been essentially in a combine or on a planner for the last 2 weeks. And in fact, immediately after this meeting, I'm getting back in the combine. My goal, and let me go back to, let's see if I can reshare that OVT website, because I want to show you all where that data would be. Share. So we're back on the OVT website. If I go all the way to the bottom, you're going to see there's corn silage sets that just haven't been populated. This data is ready. It literally just I just need like a couple of hours to format the tables and get them posted. But I will let y'all know the minute that happens, hopefully this week. You'll also notice I've got some summary data I need to include here as well, the soil type, the soil tests, and our practices along with the weather data, and then our list of sponsors and cooperators. Hopefully this will get done by the end of the week, if everything goes well. But yes, silage is coming soon. I promise. Were you saying something, Rod? You're muted.
You just answered my question. I was going to ask about weather data, and I was just looking at it. You pull that from the cloud, right? I mean, you don't have individual. You're not putting a weather station at each site. You're using.
No, so it's called Iteris, or it used to be called Iteris. It was bought by DTN. It's a plugin for our database software.
Right.
And what it does is it takes the GPS coordinates, and whether there's a specific weather station in that area or not, it models based off the weather stations in the general vicinity and gives you a modeled weather. So high, low temp, amount of rainfall, soil, moisture. It is a very, very, very rough estimate, right?
Right.
For me, it's just a relative value of, hey, this is kind of relatively how these different sites work. So I'll show you 2022 since I don't have 2023's posted just yet. We got weather data. That's what this looks like here.
Yeah.
We report the high temperature across the board because for me in corn, high temperature is kind of the deciding factor on good production. The amount of rainfall, we give you a total. It's a very, very quick and dirty look at the weather for that area. I think there's some better ways of including that data. We haven't gotten to that point yet. But
well, I guess that was my question. If you're using a cloud-based system like this, which is rough, as you said, would it be advantageous to have I know it'd be costly, but would it be smart or advantageous to have a weather station at each site? Then you could put a ground moisture sensor in as well and do some things there for the real geeks that want to dive into that. I don't know. I don't know if that's something you thought about or if it's cost prohibitive.
No, it's something we thought about. I mean, the cost is potentially an issue because you're looking at concurrently 17 and 10. You'd have to have at least 30 concurrent weather stations out.
Yeah.
Given the amount of locations I have that are overlapping.
Yeah. Now you wouldn't have to
mind.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily have to pay for data for all those. You could just download it at the end of the year, which would save you some money. But still, it's I was just wondering.
It's something we've discussed. It's definitely on the table for something that I may still integrate. It's just not because we've had the Iteris software available to us. It's not something that we've necessarily prioritized just yet, but we have thought about it. So, any other questions? Any other one looks at specific things within the database? Get back to. Okay. I'll say this. Thank you all for attending. My hope in these, and if you're an agent on this call, if you're a grower on this call, let your neighbors know, let your growers know. My hope in this is that, we're more active in the data delivery we're giving back to you. I want you to be a part of that conversation. I don't want to be in the situation of Ryan posts some data tables at midnight and hopes that somebody goes and looks at them. I want to have that conversation around how hybrids performed, what worked well where, in our data, what didn't work as well. Because I think that's important. I think that active conversation helps me understand what y'all are looking for, and hopefully helps y'all understand kind of the data and how it's currently being constructed. And through that conversation, maybe we find some better ways of reporting that data, whether that's integrating Chad's data or whether that's putting specific weather stations at these sites. I want that conversation to be more active. So absolutely, hopefully y'all enjoyed this. Hopefully this was informative for you. If it wasn't, let me know. If it was, let your growers know, let your neighbors know. I'll have one for soybeans in December, and then we will do the exact same thing next year. My goal, my commitment is to keep doing this moving forward for as long as I can. So thank you all for attending. If you have any questions on either the data itself or how to use the variety selection tool, please get in touch with me, email, phone, checks, doesn't matter. I might be in a combine or on a planner, and I'll answer your call as soon as I can. So thank you all. I hope you all have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you too, Ryan. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan.